Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome back to the poem of the day for today, Thursday, September 25th, 2025. And if it's your first time joining us, welcome. Thank you for being here. We're going to continue today with our read through Elizabeth Bishop's book, Geography 3, which was published in 1977. It's probably her best known work in her lifetime, and she published 101 poems during her life. From my understanding, has wrote many more, but those were the ones that were published that she was able to publish while she was alive. And fittingly, the poem today is called Poem. But I think the connection between the title and the content of said poem is not only the biggest question that the poem is asking the reader to grapple with, but also perhaps the most challenging thing about this poem. And I have a theory that I'll run by you all at the end of this. However, I'm always interested to hear more interpretations. So this is Poem by Elizabeth Bishop. About the size of an old-style dollar bill, American or Canadian, mostly the same whites, gray greens, and steel grays, this little painting, a sketch for a larger one, has never earned any money in its life. Useless and free, it has spent 70 years as a minor family relic handed along collaterally to owners who looked at it sometimes or didn't bother to. It must be Nova Scotia. Only there does one see gabled wooden houses painted that awful shade of brown. The other houses, the bits that show, are white. Elm trees, low hills, a thin church steeple, that gray-blue wisp, or is it? In the foreground, a water meadow with some tiny cows, 2 brush strokes each, but confidently cows. 2 minuscule white geese in the blue water, back to back, feeding, and a slanting stick. Up closer, a wild iris, white and yellow, fresh squiggled from the tube. The air is fresh and cold early spring, clear as gray glass. A half-inch of blue sky below the steel-gray storm clouds. They were the artist's specialty. A speck-like bird is flying to the left, or is it a fly speck looking like a bird? Heavens, I recognize the place. I know it. It's behind, I can almost remember the farmer's name. His barn backed on that meadow. There it is, titanium white, one dab, the hint of a steeple, filaments of brush hairs, barely there. Must be the Presbyterian church. Would that be Miss Gillespie's house? Those peculiar geese and cows are naturally before my time. A sketch done in an hour, in one breath. Once taken from a trunk and handed over. Would you like this? I'll probably never have room to hang these things again. Your Uncle George, no, my Uncle George. He'd be your great uncle. Left them all with Mother when he went back to England. You know, he was quite famous, an R.A. I never knew him. We both knew this place, apparently. This literal small backwater. Looked at it long enough to memorize it. Our years apart. How strange. And it's still loved. Or its memory is. It must have changed a lot. Our visions coincided. Visions is too serious a word. Our looks, 2 looks. Art copying from life, and life itself. Life and the memory of it so compressed they've turned into each other. Which is which? Life and memory of it cramped, dim, on a piece of Bristol board. Dim. But how live, how touching in detail. The little that we get for free, the little of our earthly trust. Not much. About the size of our abidance along with theirs. The munching cows, the iris, crisp and shivering, the water still standing from spring freshets, the yet-to-be dismantled elms, the geese. Okay. This poem, excuse me, like the other Elizabeth Bishop poems that we've read, is focused a lot on, again, images of nature, the collision of the relationship between humans and the natural world. It's focused a lot on focusing a lot on one particular thing, in this case, a painting, and the way that the painting is materially and financially useless, but that it evokes strong reactions from the person who is viewing it, the person who it's sort of being passed down to. And the third thing that I see that's familiar with a lot of her work is the way in which these observations of the natural world or about common objects might start as peculiar and somewhat foreign, but then give way to deeper musings about the role of beauty in our life and our ability to kind of take in and I'm struggling for the word here, but kind of mix that beauty with our own life and with our own experiences and our own senses of ourself. This poem is called Poem, and there's not a poem within the poem. There's a painting within the poem. And so I think what we can immediately do with that, with the conceit, if you will, is to assume that the painting is standing in for the poem. And what I think is really interesting about this is that it's not just, oh, instead of poem, I mean painting, because then why not just talk about it as a painting? I think that the stanzas in this represent the different stages in which a reader encounters a poem specifically. One of the things I was actually talking to my students about today, because we are beginning some poetry, and we began by doing some free writing about one's experiences with poetry, which often for them are frustrated, sigh-inducing, challenging. And a lot of the things that they voiced were, I feel like there's a secret hidden meaning that I'm never able to get. I feel like I come to some understanding that isn't what the teacher's looking for. I feel like I read it and I just don't get it, and it would be better if I read it again, which is 100% correct. That last part, I think, is 100% correct. Poems ask us to, as paintings do, stop and stand and stare. Paintings in a gallery are kind of a wonderful antidote to scrolling culture, where now we look at headlines and we think that we've read the news. We scroll through pictures and think that we've seen and understood other people's lives. We make quick judgments about people just by looking at quick images. And to be in a gallery is to ask you to stand and stare and be still with that image and to contemplate it. And that's the way to read a poem, not in a scroll scan sort of way. And I would argue not even the way that most of us read prose or read fiction or novels, which is that most of the prose fiction and novels is intelligible on the surface level, at least for comprehending literally what's going on within it. Poems often are not, and poems often require us, like paintings do, to revisit them, to reread them, to sit with them, to consider, to pause, to contemplate, to risk being bored. And I think that that's what this poem is precisely about. In the first stanza, we get the briefest description, the most surface level apprehension of the art object. We get a description of its size. We get a description of the colors. We get the idea from the speaker that it's a little painting that maybe was a sketch for a larger one. So it's also something that's not perhaps fully in its own becoming at this time. We get a valuation of its valuelessness, that it's never earned money, that it's useless. It spent 70 years in a minor relic, so it didn't produce any sort of effect for the reader's judgment. For 70 whole years, it's been ignored, and most people didn't even bother to look at it. So the first thing there is a kind of indifference, a keeping at bay, a distancing of the viewer from the art piece. The second is an attempt to reckon with the specific details and to orient oneself with the kind of geographies of the poem or the geographies of the art piece. The person surmises that it must be Nova Scotia, and they get there by pointing to specific details. So you try to make a reading of a poem, and that's the way that you do it. I think the poem is about X. Well, how do you know? Because of these lines, because of these specific details of measure, rhythm, imagery, etc. And so they start talking about the different shades of brown, the other houses, the elm trees, even interrogating their own interpretations twice in there. The gray blue wisp, or is it? Um, we get a description of the process of making it, right? Two brush strokes, but the brush strokes are confident. So there's a sense that there's a person behind this. We have a questioning of one's own observation, a speck like bird, or is it a fly speck looking like a bird? So I've noticed something, and it could be one of two things, but I'm not particularly sure just yet what it is. And then I think the turn of this poem is this, what I like to refer to as the aha moment. It's said in this poem as, heavens, I recognize the place, I know it. And, T.S. Eliot says that poetry communicates before it is understood. And I spoke with my students actually today about music. They listen to a lot of music. And I said, do you ever have that song that you have to go back to 8 times? The first time you hear it, it's meh. And you have to go back to it 8-ish times, then it becomes very important to you. Or a line in that song that you're not exactly sure what it literally means, but you intuit and you feel the importance of its meaning. One for me, for example, is a poem I haven't done on this channel yet, but it's T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And there's a line in there that says, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floor of silent seas. Literally, it's hard to deal with that wish, that kind of depersonifying wish in there, but that's a line that I think you can just hear it once and understand it before it communicates itself to you as an interpretation. And so I think that's the moment of, heavens, I recognize it, I know it. From there, then, in stanza 5, the reader is reading the poem and trying to make connections to something bigger and something broader and something more personal. This is where they're talking about their own past. And we often try to relate pieces of art to our own lives in order to understand them better and to have something to say about them, right? So this is where they're talking about your Uncle George. Oh no, my Uncle George. Oh, they left me. Oh yeah, remember about Uncle George. And then it kind of goes off on a tangent there. And the fourth stanza is the one that then does not allow for any poem or any piece of art to be fully closed. Good interpretations of art are open systems. They raise questions that you might not have had before. They often prioritize the uncertainty of the questions over the certainty of answers. And I will often tell my students that if you leave class with more questions than you came in with, you should count that as a successful class. Please don't think that you need to come in confused and leave with full understanding. That's not really how the reading of literature works. The reading of literature works, if it works, as opening up the texts to you that you can discover things that you previously had not seen or considered. And I think that this is what's going on in the final stanza, because this is also the most reflective, introspective, and philosophical. It begins with that recognition of, I never knew him, but we both knew this place. So there's a connection between two people, one who is the speaker, one whom they've never met, they never know, but they heard about, and it's connected through this art object, this painting that they have a shared experience of in common. And we have a lot of that ourselves, whether it's through family or through complete strangers. If I've read this poem now, and I assume thousands, tens of thousands, hopefully hundreds of thousands of other people have read this poem, and we're linked in our experience of this poem. Think of the countless people who have seen the Mona Lisa that remain strangers to one another, but they're united by a shared experience of that particular art object. And then it has the reader reflect on their own memory as well, and the strangeness of the visions that are conjured up in their memory through this. Looks, it says, this is my favorite part of the poem. Our looks, two looks, art copying from life and life itself, life and the memory of it so compressed they've turned into each other. So to look at a work of art and for it to make you feel emotions that are tied to personal memories the speaker here is talking about visions or two works that coincide. That feeling of, does art imitate life or life imitate art? The answer is yes, those two things coincide to one another. And it creates a memory so compressed, a memory that might be false, but it's itself a fiction or a story or a piece of art that you tell yourself, and then it merges together with your life. Because even if it's something that's not completely accurate in detail or might have some embellishment in it, it's a part of the story that you tell yourself, and so it forms and informs your life in the present and the decisions that you make in the future. And I think there's more to say about the rest of this stanza, particularly its return to talking about the cows and the irises and the geese as the things that remain kind of unaccounted for, or the things that we perhaps ignore or overlook when we're making these sort of memories and connections. But I really want to end on that note of memory and life coinciding into one another and then creating their own reality, which to me is as beautiful an articulation for why we should read poetry or why we should look at art together at all, at least on a personal level. You could argue for social and political reasons, artistic reasons, but on a personal level, to understand it as something that re-engages and re-enchants our memory and merges it with our life, I think is a really beautiful way to consider and think about that. I'm sure you could tell from my passion of discussing this poem that it's something that I found very beautiful and rich and thought-provoking, and it's becoming one of my favorites. It's one that I'm looking forward to going back to, and I could imagine perhaps using in a class at some point, because it talks about the experience that a lot of us go through when interpolating a new piece of art, and the struggles, but also the kind of gifts and the treasures that lay in there for us if only we stick with it. So thank you for sticking with me. This was a longer video, which was not my intention, but I was cooking, as the kids say. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. May peace be with you.